Hey everyone. I've been wanting to make this video for a while, although I guess a while is a relative term when you've only been making videos for a month. I wanted to do a video on politics and social issues in board games. The reason I've held off until now is because I don't script my videos. At best, when I'm doing a top 10 list or whatnot, I write down the lists so I have some sort of reference point to go from, but I don't put enough work or time or whatever you want to call it into these videos that I'm willing to write out a whole script and really follow that through. Which means whenever I talk about a video, I have a few key points I'm trying to hit, and then the rest is just me rambling and hoping to have as few ums and ahs as possible while I go through it. Now, while that works to some degree, while I do hope my content continues to improve in the quality and the lack of ums and ahs, the problem with doing that approach in a video about politics and social issues is I can very quickly and easily find myself halfway through the video having said something that I really want to delete, and I have to either restart or just deal with it. That being said, I'll take the risk, and if this video makes it to YouTube, then you know that I didn't say something so horrible in at least this iteration, whichever iteration of the video it actually is. So that being said, let's go into both of those things. And I'm going to start with the first one, because I think the first one's far easier. Should politics be in board games? No. I mean, that's really just how I feel about it. No. Unfortunately, I don't see the benefit that politics would bring to board games these days. Politics is so divisive that I'm not sure what benefit it can really add. Now, I don't mean thematically. There are games such as 1960. There's a new game, Watergate, that just came out. There's a game about what do you call it? There's a game about sectioning off political districts, gerrymandering. Thank you, gerrymandering. There are multiple games with a theming of politics, and that's not what I'm talking about at all. But rather the discussion of trying to push a political issue or agenda through board games. And I just don't think the benefit's there. If you want to, we can talk more about this when we get to the social issues part of the video. But with politics, what is the upside of bringing that in? Are you trying to push a political agenda? Are you trying to push a political party? I just think that the political sphere nowadays is so inherently divided that you're not going to do anything good. And this is a central premise of this entire video, which is board games, and this applies to any hobby, by the way. This applies to movies, to music, to books. Pick any hobby, anyone's hobbies, and in our case, or in my case, in our case, it's board games. But you're taking something that is meant to be enjoyable. You're taking something that someone goes to for a retreat, for something that they want to relax, get out of the world, whatever that medium might be. And now suddenly you're making it work to an extent. You're adding an agenda to it that is outside of the benefit of the board game hobby, or again, whatever hobby it might be. So to do that, the benefit of what you're doing has to be worth that. It's not, if you're going to detract from the hobby, there has to be enough of a benefit that it's worth taking out the fun and enjoyment aspect from something. So to push a political agenda, I just don't see that benefit. I think that the political sphere is too divided right now that there's no real upside, and you're just taking something that should be fun and dividing it. Now, I remember recently, Simon came out recently with the Zombicide 2nd edition, and in their stretch goals they had Obama and Trump in 2 of the final stretch goals, which I thought was a mistake. There were people in the comments. It was sad to watch, honestly. I mean, while first of all, I will say, regardless, I will say that I really appreciated that if Simon was going to do that they did it with both. They didn't have a Trump figure, they didn't have an Obama figure, they had both. Meaning while they did bring politics into the discussion, they did it on an even playing field. They didn't push one side over the other. There were digs at both in the characterization and the description of the figures. And so they at least kept it on a level playing field. That being said, they unfortunately opened the door to a level of toxicity that we unfortunately see nowadays regarding politics. If you looked in the comments on these stretch goals, there were people talking about that they were going to drop their pledges because they don't want a game with Trump in it, or people saying that they will throw out the Obama figure as soon as it comes. Meaning, if you really don't like it to that degree, just don't play with the thing, or just throw it out. It doesn't have to be a whole conversation or discussion about how this has really turned you off, or how dare they make a joke at his expense, but the joke at his expense wasn't nearly as problematic. It got toxic fairly quickly, and I think that will happen in politics and board games. Now keep in mind, this isn't even a political discussion to any real degree. This is just the inclusion of two figures. So ultimately, until politics, I say until, hoping it's until, but unless politics shifts back to a realm where it's two opposing viewpoints, but we can all have a conversation about it, until we get back to that point, I don't think politics and board games is worthwhile. You're just introducing divisiveness as opposed to introducing conversation. Which brings us to the second part of this video, which is social issues in board game. Social issues in board games are far more complicated because there actually is potential good to be achieved. Now, I guess I'll save my opinion till the end. No, I don't know. I'll figure it out as I go along. But this video is partially inspired by Five Tribes. Partially. This is going back years when the first edition of Five Tribes came out, and they had slave cards in the first edition, and they then came out with a second edition, and they had a replacement upgrade pack with fakirs instead of slaves, because slaves were not sensitive. I don't want to have slaves in my games. Now, there's different discussions at play here. The first is the legitimacy of any one issue on its own, and the second is the general idea of social issues in board games. So, for instance, using Five Tribes as a reference point, there are many people who feel differently. Speaking for myself, I felt that slaves were culturally relevant for the time. We weren't... You're whitewashing history to a certain extent to pretend that there were no slaves. At the same time, I recognize that some people don't necessarily want that in their games. Now, these discussions tend to spiral very quickly between, well, you have such a huge problem with slaves in your game, but when you're playing Memoir 44 and you're murdering tons of people, murder's not a problem. The two don't have to be mutually exclusive. If someone's sensitive to one thing, that's fine, and if someone's sensitive to another thing, that's fine. There are people who won't play Letters from Whitechapel because you're effectively playing Jack the Ripper murdering a bunch of innocent women. The whole thing's completely abstracted, but it still might give you an icky feeling. And if that personally bothers you, that personally bothers you. But within this realm, there are whole different categories of how we want to approach it. The first discussion is what personally bothers someone. If someone is personally bothered by something, that's okay. That is their decision. The same way you don't want your board games, again, if I'm someone who likes the slave cards in Five Tribes, and I'm someone who doesn't want them to change or this or that, if somebody else is bothered by it, they're bothered by it. Leave them be. That's okay. The second tier of that discussion is when it's not just an issue of I'm bothered by it, but I'm bothered by it to the point that I want you to not have it. Meaning, it's not just a question of Letters for Whitechapel makes me feel icky, but Letters for Whitechapel shouldn't exist, because how could it possibly be that anyone should ever play Mr. Jack? And I understand the viewpoint, but this is where you're going to find a lot of middle ground that gets wishy-washy. There was a famous piece about this board game that was created by someone. It wasn't like in our context of designer games, but it was a board game where the entire experiment was a level of efficiency. It wasn't mass-produced. It was a custom copy made for the sake of this social experiment. And they had this giant engine or whatnot of how to maximally efficiently move your guys across trains to various places, and at the end of the game you really find out that you're just herding a bunch of Jews onto trains to take them to Holocaust, to take them to concentration camps. So, and the whole point was to take an abstracted concept and then say, this is what you've been doing, and how does that make you feel? And that's cute. It's great as a social experiment, and it's certainly a fascinating discussion as to where's the line? What is okay? What is clearly not okay? And how do we deal with everything in between? There are definitely levels of content in board games that I hope anyone would find distasteful. There are definitely levels. Whatever that level might be for yourself, think of the worst possible construct you could have in a board game, the thing that would be most distasteful, that how could someone think that this is okay in a form of entertainment? And whatever that level is for you, understand that everyone's going to have their own level. And the flip side is the other end of the spectrum. Think of something that's so tame that you are completely okay with it. And everyone's going to have their own end of the spectrum. So what we wind up with is we have this spectrum of acceptable and unacceptable that is going to be uniquely different for every single person. Now this is a discussion that inherently exists with any social issue. But the question is, where's the line? Where's the boundary? Where is it okay to introduce something into a game, and where is it clearly not okay, and how do we have these conversations? The way I feel about social issues in board games is, for the most part, I don't care with them. I understand why they exist. I understand why people will want to address an agenda. And I don't mean agenda in the sense of a negative sense. I mean, again, like the 5-tribe slave cards is one example. But there's another common example is the representation of men versus women in board games. So there are different instances of this happening. So one example is, for instance, when you have, I've seen examples of more medieval games where they're upset that there aren't more women. And while I understand that there might be fewer women than men, I also think it's probably historically accurate to a degree. And when something is historically accurate, it tends to not bother me. Versus when something crosses from historical accuracy issues to just a real representation problem, then I understand why it would bother someone. But I for one tend to not be bothered by these. I'm into board games because I want it to be a hobby. I want it to be enjoyable. There's obviously a level of distaste that I could experience that would put me off. And an example of a game that kind of crosses that line for me is Kingdom Death Monster. One of the reasons I've held off from playing Kingdom Death Monster for 2 reasons. And honestly, both of them are fairly the same in my distaste. The first is that I have no interest in assembling miniatures. I used to do Warhammer way back in the day. It was too much work pretending you were playing the game and not enough time actually spent playing the game. And I don't have an interest in getting anything that involves assembling minis, while there are great games left that I have yet to try that don't involve assembling minis. The second is the theme. I find the theme completely over the top, and while I have no problem with someone who isn't bothered by that, for me it's distasteful. So while I might try it one day, and while I might enjoy it one day, the theme is certainly a put-off for me. Social issues in board games are tough. Social issues anywhere are tough. There can be an added value. This whole push for representation of men versus women, I think it is an important discussion because there's a lot of value around it. The hobby should be inclusive, and while steps are certainly being made in the right direction, I don't think it is as inclusive as it could be. I think it is a male-dominated hobby, and for sure, there's to a certain extent that is a level of interest being displayed by men versus women. At the same time, I believe there's a lot more room for women to feel included, and anything we can do to make that happen is good. This goes back to what I said earlier. There has to be an upside when you're going to dilute someone's hobby and turn it into an exercise of what's okay, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. There has to be a positive upside. There has to be a reason why you're willing to introduce this friction to a hobby. And if that upside is the inclusion of an entire gender to a larger degree, meaning, again, I don't feel the need for 50%. I've never felt the need for 50% anything. What I do feel is important is that up to 50% to whatever degree they want to be included. If men, women, whoever want to be included in a hobby, they should be able to be included in a hobby. They should feel welcome. There should be as few barriers to entry as possible. Now, I don't believe that means sitting there and taking some sort of, taking some sort of medieval war game and then having all women troops of whatever. Like even Blood Rage, for instance. Blood Rage has, multiple clans going on, and then they have one all-female clan. It certainly doesn't bother me that they have a female clan. I appreciate the additional selection. At the same time, it probably wouldn't be a lack of historical accuracy to have all male clans. The flip side is, if I'm playing a game where it's all females that makes sense, I have no problem with that. When you're playing Rococo or any game that's more of a female theme, what's the other one? There's another one, a design theme. If it's all female based, it's all female based. I'm more into whether it fits the theme, when it fits the theme. At the same time, when there's room for that variability. When you're playing Zombicide Invader and it's taking place in the future, where there's a much larger degree and a much more larger likelihood of having female and male people in your army and your troops or people, whatever, then yeah, take that opportunity. And not just having men and women, but also having men and women in the way men and women would want to play men and women. And this is another common discussion about, the male fantasy tropes versus female fantasy tropes. But the point of this video isn't to push my own personal opinion on you. The point is that, well, I mean, to some extent, that inherently I'm pushing my opinion on you, to some extent. But the point isn't to take my own opinions of what's okay in board games or not and accept them upon yourself. The real point I'm trying to put out for food for thought is the idea of whenever you're going to push an agenda, political, social, of any kind, whenever you're going to try to take away from the sheer fun and enjoyment of the hobby and add another non-gaming element into the hobby that in some way restricts someone's fun or ability to have fun with the hobby, there has to be an upside. That upside, this can't be a negativity-based thing. There has to be a benefit to what's going on. Social issues are complicated. The discussion of them can lead to great good. It can also lead to a certain amount of toxicity, which is unfortunate, but it can lead to good. So I personally tend to avoid social issues in board games, but I'm all for the inclusion of social issues because it pushes the conversations. It pushes for things that might have a positive outcome. Versus politics, I don't think there will be. So the next time you're on a forum discussing whether something should be in a game, shouldn't be in a game, whether you're not going to buy that game because they have 30% female characters versus 70% female characters, think through what good you're bringing into this world. And not just in your opinion, but in the way you convey your opinion. I just changed my... There's a quote, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's something along the lines of, I'm really glad you shared that with me. I'm really glad you shared that Facebook post with me. I just changed my mind. Said no one ever. People don't change their minds because someone shouted at them on the internet. People change their minds because you talk to them respectfully. You validate their viewpoint. You validate where they're coming from. And then you introduce where you're coming from. It's not a discussion about, well, how dare you have a problem with more female characters, you sexist pig. Rather, it should be, I understand why you feel that the game is okay as is. At the same time, speaking for myself, I would rather have the opportunity to play more female characters. Does it dilute your enjoyment of the game to have more female characters and to allow me to feel included? And that's just an example, but talk respectfully. Convey your viewpoints to people in a way that actually compels people to listen and not just shouting at people on the internet. It's the internet. You're unlikely to have that much of a positive effect when you talk to people. You're unlikely to have a positive effect to any reasonable degree to begin with. You're much more unlikely to have a positive effect when you just shout at people. Opinions are hard to change, unfortunately. And the greatest chance of them changing is from friends, from people who you know, people who you can really have a real conversation with, and not just on the internet. But whatever level you can, we should be doing it. At the end of the day, we're all in this to have fun, and I think we all want each other to have fun. And that should be a prime goal in what we're doing here. I think I've rambled on for long enough. I don't know if I have a clear way to finish this up, but really just try to do good. That really should be the focus. Whenever you're having a conversation, whenever you're pushing something, ensure you're doing good. Have to take a doctor's vow, do no harm or whatnot. That's been this ramble about politics and social issues in board games. This video is brought to you by Board Game Co. I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. You can buy 5 tribes on our website. I probably have both with the sleeve cards and without, because we have older and newer games. We have a lot of other games, and a lot of games that are directed for men, for women, for everything in between. Feel free to give us a shot. BoardGameCo.com. You can buy, trade, sell with us. And until next time, you can like the video, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.